Today I'm going to be showing you how to paint a Necron Cryptek, in particular a very unique gold colour, and I'm going to share a hobby tip which hopefully you'll find very useful. It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. And if you're new to the channel and you want to learn about Necrons and more, then please subscribe and hit the bell button to turn on all notifications so you don't miss an upload. Okay, so today I'm going to be showing you how I paint my Canoptic Cloak Cryptek. This is actually my converted Cryptek, which I did recently, so if you haven't seen that conversion video, I will link it in the description below. However, today is about painting that model, and like all of my Necron characters, I'm going to be painting it a rather unique gold colour. Now I know it's unique because, well, I've had trouble repeating this gold colour. So I started my army around 20 years ago, and when it came to the HQ I knew I wanted it to be gold, so I made up a gold colour. Doorbell. I didn't like the Games Workshop gold colour at the time, so I mixed gold and silver together to get my gold colour. However, when it came to repeating that gold colour, well, I just couldn't match it, not easily anyway. So my hot hobby tip is to get one of these, a notebook, and write down everything that you paint, which is exactly what I do now. Every time I paint something, I note it down. However, I have worked out a way to get this gold colour. It's quite unusual, let's say, but it does work, and I do end up matching my original paint scheme. Of course, I'm going to paint the whole of the Cryptek, so I hope you enjoy the tutorial. Okay, so this is the Cryptek which I'm going to be painting today. Of course, this is my converted Cryptek. I've got this very big old tomb spider there. We've got his cloak and the actual model separate. I'm going to glue them together afterwards because it will be easier to paint sub-assembly. Now I'm going to start off by dry brushing this miniature. I'm going to use this Artus Opus dry brush. You don't necessarily have to use this particular brush. Any dry brush will do, Games Workshop, Army Painter, or indeed you could use a brush that's not actually a dry brush. So potentially you could use something like this. This is a base brush. The key thing is to have some nice soft bristles. Okay, so let's get him painted. Now before you paint the model, of course you will need to prime it. For this particular paint scheme, you'll need to prime it black. I went in with a black spray can, and then once that was dry, I just touched up any of the misses with some black paint and a brush. Sometimes when you spray at an angle, you'll get some little misses where the primer doesn't hit. Okay, so we're going to start off using Iron Breaker. I've got some of that paint in my wet palette. I've then got some cloth, this is just an old pair of jeans, and then some tissue. What we're going to do is take our dry brush, put it into the paint, and then use the cloth to take the paint off. Then use the tissue just to make sure that all of the paint is off. We don't want any splotches. As opposed to the tissue, you could use your thumb, although I do find that sometimes if you've got greasy skin, it can sort of get onto the brush and just mess it up. So with the paint on our brush, we are going to gently go over the model, just like so, and literally just dry brush it. Now sometimes you'll find that you haven't got enough paint on, like that for example, so just put a bit more paint on. Take the paint off, use the tissue to make sure you've got no splodges, and then just try again. And there you go, we've got some more paint, so you can see the silver there going on. Just gently do this. It's not going to cover totally, it will be a bit splodgy, but that's how we want it because that's how we get a nice metal effect. Now on the actual spider itself, I'm going to use a slightly bigger dry brush. So again, it's the same idea, paint, take the paint off, make sure it's not splodgy, and then get the bigger brush and literally just dry brush that all over. So I'm going to do that and then I will be back. Okay, so that's all done. Now, one thing I would say is if you do accidentally splodge the silver on, let's say you get like a big silver patch where you just have too much paint on, you could try wiping it away with your finger, or what you could do is just dry brush over that patch with black. So dry brush over the patch with black, and then you could go back over with the silver colour just to finish it off. So that coat's done. Now we're going to move on to the next stage. Okay, so we are ready for the next stage. Now my spider himself is going to be a silver colour, but of course the Cryptek is going to be gold. Effectively, I'm painting him very similar to this Cryptek which I've got here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to paint all of the silver pieces first before we move on to the gold. And we're going to do that with another dry brush. And we're going to use lead boucher. So I've got some of that already on my wet palette. I have my dry brush. We're going to repeat what we just did all over the areas which are going to be just silver. So again, just gently dry brush over the model where the silver sections are, and this will make it look like a nice patchy metal colour. It's the final stage of the metal. You could potentially go over with some edge highlighting with, say, Runefang Steel if you wanted to. So do that all over the silver, and then we'll be looking at the gold. Okay, so that's the silver done. I did go in and edge highlight the silver area on the staff because that's how I did it on the original model just here. And of course, next we're going to do the gold, and this is the gold that I'm going to be trying to duplicate. As I said, it's going to be quite an unusual way, but it was the only way that I could actually get it looking the same. And the next step, we are going to need Gehenna's Gold. Now, there's one thing to note regarding this paint. It's a very reddish paint, and the red can separate quite easily from the gold. So give it a good shake, but also at the same time, I would actually stir it with a stick. Really mix this gold up. Otherwise, you'll end up with quite a reddish looking gold, and that is not what we want. So we're going to mix this up, and then we're going to mix it with 2 parts gold and 1 part Runefang Steel. We're going to mix those together and put it on our wet palette. So I've got that paint on my palette, and we are going to basically dry brush over the silver areas that we want gold. So of course it's going to be on the Canoptic cloak here, and we're actually going to do 2 coats with this particular layer. So I'm literally just going to dry brush it over. Now obviously dry brushing is a bit messy. You may find that you'll go on top of some of the silver, so you might have to rework the silver at the end, but I'm not too worried about that. That's quite easy to do. So yeah, go over the whole model, dry brushing with this colour, and do 2 coats, and then we'll be back. Okay, so that's that layer done twice. We're now going to mix up a new batch of paint. This time 2 parts Gehenna's Gold and 1 part lead boucher. We're going to use our dry brush again, however this time rather than dry brushing we're going to overbrush. Now overbrush is very similar to dry brushing, except you have the paint on there a little bit more. So it's like doing a wet dry brush almost. So we're going to get our paint onto the brush. We are going to dab it off a little bit, but not too much. And then we're going to get our model and we're going to overbrush this. So effectively we're putting a sort of a wet dry brush on over the top of the first 2 layers that we've done. So I'm going to do this all over, and I'm actually going to do this twice once again. So 2 coats of this, and then we will be back. Okay, so that's done. What we're going to do now is we are going to do a dry brush of pure Gehenna's Gold. So no mixture this time. We've got the straight gold on our palette. We're going to do a dry brush over the top of this gold with this colour. This is really going to increase the density of the gold, and then after this we'll just have 1 more coat to do. Okay, that's that layer done, and I actually did 2 dry brush coats with that layer. So like I said, we're on the last one now, which is just to change this gold into the gold which I originally painted way back in the day. And that is another dry brush of the first coat of paints that we did, and that was a mixture of Gehenna's Gold and Runefeng Steel, 2 gold to 1 silver, and we got that on our wets palette. We are going to do a final light dry brush. This is going to be a light dry brush and just 1 coat over this gold here, and this will give me my final gold colour that I'm looking for. So I'm going to do that all over, and the gold is done. Okay, so we've now got our gold colour. However, we are going to do a little bit more work to this. We are going to go into all of the recesses with a black wash, and we are going to use the Citadel Nuln Oil shade. This is called pin washing, so we're not going to wash all over, we're just going to go into the little recesses. So literally just get a small brush and just lay in some of this black wash into the recesses, and do that where needed. Of course, not every recess will need this wash because it may be quite dark already from how we've painted him. Okay, so that's all done. I also went into the little spine section and just touched up with some Runefeng Steel where the gold had obviously gone onto that from the dry brushing. So we are ready for the next stage. Okay, so that's the gold and silver done, and now we can go in and do our detailing colours. I'm going to be using green, white and gold. Yes, another gold, but it will be a different colour. Of course, if you want to follow a particular dynasty like Novok, you could introduce maybe red as opposed to green. So I'm using my original Cryptek here as reference, and the first thing I'm going to do is base coat all of the green areas. And I'm going to use Warpstone Green for this. So any orb, any eye, any crystal will be painted green. I'm going to do 2 thin coats, build up a nice thin layer, and then we'll be back. Okay, so that's all the base coats done. I actually did 3 layers just to build up the green over the top of the metallics, and they're all done. So now we're going to highlight that green. I'm going to use mute green to highlight them. I'm going to use a few different techniques depending on the effects that I want. So some of these areas, like this big crystal in the staff, I'm just going to literally paint straight over a nice block colour of the mute green. I want that to be a nice bright crystal. And then some of the small green sections, like the eyes and the small orbs, I'm just going to layer the colour on, leaving the original colour on the outside. And then some of the bigger orbs, I'm going to go in and I'm going to block glaze these. I'm not going to show you how to block glaze in this video, but I do have a tutorial about block glazing which I'll link you up to in the description below. Basically it gives you a smoother transition between one green and the next. Now you may have noticed I did a little bit more work on the spider here. All I've done is dry brushed black over the little hinges on his leg, just to make them look a little bit more oily and to add some contrast to the model. So that's what I did there. Okay, time to finish the green. Okay, so that is the green done. Now I've just adjusted the white balance on my cameras because the sun's been starting to come in, and I think the last footage was a slightly odd colour. However, the green is now done on all of the areas and looking pretty good. So we're going to move on to the next stage, and for me it's going to be the cloak just here. Yeah, I can start banging anytime you like. Thank you. Now on my previous model I've painted the cloak purple, but that's not necessarily my actual paint scheme for the whole army. Actually, each lord of mine gets a different coloured cloak. And to be honest with you, I'm starting to run out of colours, so I need to come up with a colour for this. I'm thinking white, because I haven't painted any of my cloaks white yet. But rather than just the stark bright white, which I would usually use on things like the front of the spiders, I'm thinking of doing it more of a grey colour and then highlighting it with white. So I'm going to base coat this with grey, then I'm going to dry brush over the top with white, and hopefully that will look pretty cool. Now at the same time I'm going to paint white on the front of this spider, just to match it into what I've already done on this Cryptek. Geez, why do you have to do decorating right now? Okay, so that's all done. So I started off with a white scar and I built up some white layers on the face section of this spider. Took me about 5 or 6 layers, but just thin white paint, just building up the colour, and I've got a nice smooth white there. Looks pretty cool and definitely adds some depth to the spider. And then on the cloak here, I base coated with Administratum Grey, and again I did several coats, probably about 4 or 5 thin layers. Then I gave it a wash using this wash here from Vallejo. This is Pale Grey, so just a grey wash. I let that dry, and then I dry brushed over the top with white scar, just hitting the edges. And you can see that's the inside of the cloak, which is done as well. And I've done the little tabard just on here. Now because I was dry brushing, it's gone over the silver, which is fine. I'm just going to repaint in the silver. And on my paint scheme, just to bring this colour more to the model, I've put that grey on his staff, so every other little beading is that grey colour. And I do that with all of my HQs. You can see this one here with his purple staff, the same as his cloak. So all I've got left to do now is go in and paint these other sections that I want to be gold, and I'm going to use a different gold. It is a discontinued paint, it's shining gold. However, this is what I use on my Necrons. I have to say this is quite hard to get hold of. I'm very lucky that the guys in the Wargamers Unification Facebook group sent me some paint, so massive thank you to you 3 guys that sent me some paint. I really appreciate it. And check out the Wargamers Unification group, we'd love to have you there. So I'm going to paint the gold in certain areas. I'm going to paint it on this back section, just on the rim. I also paint it on his little crest where his head goes, and on the little Necron symbol there as well. And then I add some silver on the crest, the little wires, the little section just above the head there. Just pick out some extra colours to add some gold and silver, just to give the model a little bit more contrast. That's all I've got left to do, so once that's done, he will be finished. Okay, there you go, he is finished. I'm really happy how he's looking, and I'm really happy with the conversion. I hope you like it too, and I hope you learned something from the tutorial. I do have some other tutorials that I've made. Go and check them out, and I'll see you in the next one. Beam me up.